think it's agreed with our distinguished keynote speakers. I think it's in the interest of all to save time, also for the delegations to take the floor, that we begin already. The two distinguished keynote speakers will join us as soon as possible here in our meeting. And of course, let me say that already before they enter the room, I'm extremely pleased, of course, that we have today the great honor and pleasure to welcome the OSCE's chairperson in office, the Foreign Minister and First Deputy Prime Minister of Serbia, Mr. Ivica Dačić, who will join us shortly in very few minutes together with our other distinguished keynote speaker and guest, the Foreign Minister of our host country, Poland, and we are proud as ODIHR to serve in Poland, in this fantastic host country, Mr. Grzegorz Schetina. Both of them, of course, will, after they come, immediately following the speaker who has currently the floor, join in the speakers list. But of course, I'm very glad that next, of course, to these distinguished speakers, we have quite a whole range of important persons today taking the floor, addressing this opening, before we come in the second part to the statements of the delegations. One of them, unfortunately, had to cancel. It's the President of the Parliamentary Assembly, Mr. Ilkka Kanerva. He is very sorry. He transmits his best greetings. His deputy, one of the vice presidents of the PA, will join the HDIM during this week and speak to all of us, but he, again, is unable to attend today personally. But the next, of course, then to take the floor is, I'm very happy, of course, to welcome him, I think for the first time in a Human Dimension implementation meeting, is Mr. Gernot Erler, MP, the Special Representative of the Federal Government of Germany for the OSCE Chairmanship in 2016. We are very happy to have him here sharing his ideas, also as an outlook also to next year with us. And certainly, I'm very happy to welcome here the colleagues, the dear friend and colleague Lamberto Zanier, Secretary General of the OSCE, who will address us certainly, as well as Dunja Mijatovic, the representative on freedom of the media, and Astrid Thors, the High Commissioner on National Minorities. The close cooperation among institutions and with the Secretariat in Vienna and with the missions certainly in all over the areas of the OSCE as at the very center of cooperation, and this very close and trustful cooperation with the other institutions, let me say that, is for me of utmost importance, and for the whole team of ODIHR of utmost importance. So having said that, of course, let us come to our first welcoming speaker, Gernot Erler, on behalf of the incoming chairmanship of the OSCE, of Germany's incoming chairmanship. Gernot, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. Sehr geehrter Herr Generalsekretär.
Secretary General, Madame Thors, Madame Mijatovic, Mr. Link, dear colleagues, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of civil society, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure for me to have been invited here to Warsaw to talk to you about the implementation of the human dimension within the OSCE. Let me start by thanking the Serbian chairpersonship in office for its unflagging efforts this year. We all know how difficult the work of the chairpersonship in office is, especially under current circumstances. So we congratulate Serbia and we thank them. I would also like to thank Mr. Link, the director of ODIHR, and his staff for having prepared this meeting in Warsaw so ably. We know how much work that entails. Ladies and gentlemen, the previous speaker has already spoken to the development crisis in Europe and to the difficult situation of human rights. And this is something that will be very serious for the next chairpersonship in office. We find ourselves perhaps in the most serious security situation in Europe since the end of the Cold War. Crimea has been annexed contrary to international law, and the behavior of Russia in Ukraine is threatening the fundamental values of Europe and the principles of the OSCE and ODIHR. The implementation of commitments in the field of human rights and fundamental freedoms are a cornerstone of the OSCE, but this crisis has also shown us how important the OSCE is for security in Europe. It is extremely important and valuable as an instrument for controlling conflicts. What the OSCE has done since the crisis in Ukraine and its periphery is extremely valuable. We have observation missions in place, the trilateral contact group, the border missions, the implementation of projects within Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, the crisis also shows us how important the role of the OSCE is as a guardian of the achievements that we have reached in Europe since the Helsinki Final Act. The principles of the Helsinki Final Act are as topical today as they were 40 years ago. Territorial integrity, the preservation of borders, not accepting interference in the affairs of other states, respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. Now, the latter has become an achievement of the human dimension with a whole set of rules and standards that we consider to be an essential component of security in Europe. The current events in Ukraine and around Ukraine have put into question the principle of inviolability of borders, and this puts additional pressure on the principle of democratic governments and human rights and fundamental freedoms. And this shows how important those achievements of the OSCE are as something that is a joint responsibility. I'm convinced that common security and dialogue with mutual trust is something that is possible only if common rules are followed. They must be binding in political terms, and they must be fully respected by all members of the OSCE. They are an unflagging aspect of everything that we must respect. In the Moscow document of 1991, the participating states accepted their joint will for joint security, and they stated, "We irrevocably state that responsibilities for the human dimension of the OSCE are a direct concern for all participating states, and this is not something that is of interest only to a single state." All participating states reiterated in 2010 when the OSCE held its summit in Astana. They reiterated those same principles. And this joint and common responsibility, the fact that we are prepared to discuss these issues is, I think, an expression of the will to implement the Paris Charter, where it is stated that our states will work together and mutually support one another in order that democratization become irreversible. And I think that this is an objective that we must seek to achieve. It's not a question of exerting excessive pressure on individual countries. It's a question of requiring respect for commitments and values, because we are convinced that these values and these responsibilities are essential for security and stability within the whole OSCE area. Ladies and gentlemen, Very valuable work has been done when it comes to the implementation of the OSCE standards. And in fact, ODIHR will be celebrating its anniversary next year, its 25th anniversary next year. That is something that we need to commemorate and to celebrate, because human rights are an inviolable value for all human beings, and they must be guaranteed by law. We already inscribed that in the Paris Charter of 1990. The rights of national minorities and various other documents erected very important standards. This has been done through serene diplomacy to ensure a peaceful coexistence between minorities and majorities. Next year, we will be celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Hague Recommendations for Rights to Education of National Minorities, and that is something that we must celebrate together. Another very important aspect, of course, is the function of the representative for media freedoms, a post that was asked for in 1997 by Germany, and Freima Duve was the first such representative. Unfortunately, journalists are still subject to pressure. They are not always fully independent, and this function of a high representative for the freedom of the media, and Madame Mijatovic, is highly respected for what she does in this regard. The Serbian chairpersonship in office to be followed by Germany will take up this torch in 2016. I said that the human dimension is a pillar of the OSCE. Germany wants to maintain and to strengthen this pillar, and for that it is necessary that there be sufficient funding of human dimension institutions. And when it comes to the budgetary debate within the OSCE, we must not forget that rising to the challenges of politics and security requires sufficient resources. I come now, ladies and gentlemen, to the third very important function of the OSCE, namely its role as a platform for dialogue. We can, of course, exert pressure and use other means when we can't protect individuals against violation of their human rights and fundamental freedoms. But the main way of preventing a conflict for the OSCE is dialogue and cooperation. And that is why in the human dimension aspect, this is particularly important. Today's conference is one of the most important ones for human rights within Europe, and it represents a forum for a dialogue on an equal footing between states and civil society in order to see to what extent our commitments when it comes to the human dimension are being implemented. We must take full advantage of this instrument. I must confess that I am very concerned when I observe the extent to which these commitments are being followed or not followed in certain individual states when it comes to the human dimension as a whole and the security of journalists and human rights in particular. We're very pleased that we will be taking over the chairpersonship in office of the OSCE in 2016, and we certainly want to make sure that the achievements of the OSCE over the last few decades are preserved and strengthened. And I can tell you that our commitments remain unshakable. We, as the chairpersonship in office, will wish to promote dialogue in order to avoid any areas of silence within the OSCE area. That means that we must insist on full respect for the commitments and to openly state when that is not the case. We will have to deal with a large number of issues because the portfolio of the OSCE includes all of these themes. And over these 2 weeks in Warsaw, we will talk about what opportunities there will be for the program of 2016 to ensure this. And let me underscore three priorities. Tolerance and non-discrimination is certainly at a very high priority. That's a very important theme. And we expect, as the chairpersonship and office, to organize a special event on this. We believe that we need to work more on the protection of rights of national minorities in order to build bridges and promote reconciliation between minorities and majorities. We must also pay a lot of attention to freedom of expression and freedom of the media. The media must be able to express themselves untrammeled, and there are problems in this regard. We must promote also exchanges among our societies. There are thousands of individuals who are refugees and who want to come to Europe, and that really is an appeal to our European humanity, but it also confronts us with significant challenges to which we will be able to rise only if we work together and talk about our common difficulties, our joint difficulties, and try to find solutions to them. And these solutions must be based on our values and our commitments in favor of these individuals in question. Minister Steinmeier has awarded the city of Magdeburg the Otto Kaiser Prize, and he stated that this crisis has shown that there are gaps in the security architecture of Europe, but the principle of building a common Europe in Helsinki continued with the Paris Charter and the Copenhagen document on the human dimension, that those instruments continue to be very significant today. We must continue to strengthen that basis. Those are important pillars for our common security, and we must work on them. And as Germany takes over the chairpersonship and office of the OSCE in 2016, it will contribute to that. Thank you for your attention.
You know, the chairman in office, of course, has a lot of privileges. One of them is, of course, to make a change in the speaking order, and we have agreed here with the two ministers that we will change the speaking order to give our distinguished guest, Foreign Minister of Poland, Grzegorz Schetyna, the possibility, of course, also to respect his other obligations today. We are very happy, Minister, that you are with us. And we are happy, I say it again, because I said it before you came, that ODIHR can serve and work in our host country, Poland. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this kindness. Chairperson, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to the annual Human Dimension of Implementation meeting in Warsaw. It's important for us, for Poles. In the beginning, I would like to commend the Serbian chairmanship of the OSCE and the personal for my friend, Minister Ivica Dacic, for the effective leadership through this year. And let me also express my appreciation to the Director of Office ODIHR, Michael Link, and his team for organizing this meeting and for your work for democracy and human rights. This event today is a major instrument for monitoring human rights situation in Europe and Central Asia and allows an open exchange of views and ideas with civil societies. 40 years have passed since signing of the Helsinki Final Act. Its 10 principles have been recognized as a universal values for the Euro-Atlantic community, for our community, especially the inviolability of frontiers, respect for territorial integrity, respect for human rights, and fundamental freedoms are all necessary conditions of peace and cooperation in Europe. Policy of force and aggression and disrespect for human rights and fundamental freedoms are contrary to the spirit and letter of the Helsinki Final Act. Only full respect of all principles in all three dimensions of OSCE may restore trust and lower the tension in Europe now in these days. Current situation has proved once again that security is a multidimensional matter. For last month, the European security architecture has been weakened. The crisis in Iran to Ukraine brings new challenges for international community. The settlement of the conflict should be based on a principle of peaceful cooperation between states and on full respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. The OSCE remains a unique forum for discussing European security system, arms control, human rights, and economic and environmental issues as well. At the same time, the comprehensive character guarantees equal participation of states and other stakeholders. The human dimension is a fundamental component of OSCE comprehensive concept of security. But this concept requires that all participating states fulfill their commitments undertaken in the field of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. The Polish peaceful transition proved how important efficient democratic institutions are, that freedom of speech, freedom of media, and strong civil society are essential for long-term social development and political stability. There can be no democracy without fair, transparent, and inclusive elections. Therefore, we value deeply the role of OSCE in assisting states in electoral processes. I commend the role of the Office of Democratic Institutions and Human Rights in elections observation. The cooperation in human dimension should strengthen mutual trust and security of the OSCE area. In this respect, we welcome the decision of the government of Belarus to invite an election observation mission of office ahead of the October presidential election. Poland also highly values office activity in fostering human rights, promoting democracy, rule of law, and non-discrimination. We strongly oppose any attempts to restrict effectiveness and independence of the office. We must not allow questioning importance of human dimension of the OSCE acquis. Now a joint effort in a full implementation on human dimension commitments of OSCE states should be a priority. The upcoming Minister Council meeting in Belgrade is an opportunity to reinforce OSCE mechanisms of monitoring and verification. In this context, I would like to emphasize the role and relevance of the Human Dimensions Implementation Meeting. In our view, it is still a powerful tool and valuable platform for discussion on human rights and democracy, assisting countries to meet their commitments in the human dimension. Important voice in this debate comes from non-governmental organizations. We are really satisfied that this important meeting is held annually, and this in the capital of Poland, in Warsaw. Ladies and gentlemen, President Ford, 40 years ago, in 1975 in Helsinki, said, "History will judge this conference not by what we say here today, but by what we do tomorrow, not by the promises we make, but by the promises we keep." Since then, great progress has been made, but we still have much to do to fulfill the promises we made 40 years ago. We need to make every effort to fight for democracy, respect for human rights, and fundamental freedoms, as they are so closely interlinked with peace and security in Europe. I do hope that the Human Dimension Implementation Meeting, your meeting, will bring us closer to this goal. I wish you an interesting and inspiring discussion. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister Schetina. Thank you for being here personally, also as a signal of support, of course, of the work of the OSCE and its institutions. And let me immediately pass the floor to our chairman in office. I'm very happy, of course, that he personally, of course, here is today with us in order to share the thoughts and points of the Serbian chairmanship It is a very, I think, good signal of cooperation, and I thank you, by the way, for the very good cooperation we had during your chairmanship already, and we are looking forward also in respect, of course, to the road to Belgrade to even intensify this cooperation. We are very happy that you are here. The first Deputy Prime Minister of Serbia and Foreign Minister Ivica Dačić, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, it is my great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Serbia's chairmanship of the OSCE to the Human Dimension Implementation meeting. At the outset, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Polish authorities as well as Director Link and his team at ODIHR for organizing this most important annual meeting within Human Dimension. I would also like to welcome representatives of the OSCE participating states, partners for cooperation, international organizations, civil society and academia. As one of the largest annual human rights forums, Human Dimension Implementation meeting is an excellent opportunity to review the implementation of commitments and exchange views on numerous issues in the area of human rights. At the same time, it is an important occasion to discuss emerging challenges that we are facing currently. And challenges are many. As we all know, Serbia took over OSCE chairmanship in an extremely difficult moment for the whole OSCE area. Situation in and around Ukraine continues to pose a serious threat to European security. Throughout the year, the chairmanship and the organization as a whole continue to do its utmost to first ensure the cessation of hostilities and restore calm, and then to bring political process based on the Minsk agreements forward. These efforts included also engagement aimed at emphasizing the importance of upholding the OSCE human rights commitments. We also opened a debate on how to address the structural damage caused by the crisis in and around Ukraine to the European security system, at the core of which our organization is embodied. We hope that by the Belgrade Ministerial Council in December, we will have a clearer picture how to proceed in rebuilding trust within the OSCE and reaffirm its basic principles. A report of the panel of eminent persons that was established by the Swiss chairmanship last year will help us in that regard, we believe. Speaking of challenges, in Europe, these days we are witnessing increasing and extremely serious migrant crisis. In the time when thousands of people are risking their lives leaving the countries affected by conflicts in the OSCE neighborhood, we must not forget the human rights and humanitarian aspects of the migrant crisis. The response in that sense so far has been less than adequate, to say the least. Building fences, closing borders, using excessive force against people who are fleeing from the devastating conflicts is not a response in line with human rights commitments participating states of this organization undertook to respect, nor other international human rights norms and standards. We have to, therefore, stand for respecting human rights for all, especially having in mind that in the times of conflicts and crisis, the fundamental human rights are the ones most affected. The Republic of Serbia is among the countries affected by the huge wave of migrants coming from war-torn areas. We have put all our efforts to respond adequately to the current crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, this year we are marking 40th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act. This was the first time that respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms were included in a regional security agreement, not as an annex, but on par with politico-military considerations. The Helsinki Final Act also established that citizens have the right to know and act upon their rights. It provided a major starting point for the development of civic and civil society engagement throughout the OSCE area. Contributions given by civil society organizations remain highly important in enhancing human rights protection. I expect this year's Human Dimension implementation meeting will provide us a good basis for fruitful discussion among participating states and with the civil society on our common challenging agenda. As recognized in Astana Declaration, civil society organizations have over the past 4 decades played an invaluable and indispensable role in monitoring governments' respect of their commitments for the benefit and security of all. Now here is this more visible than at Human Dimension implementation meeting. The role of the civil society remains high on the agenda during our 2 Swiss and Serbian consecutive chairmanships. For example, both countries carried out self-evaluation of the implementation of their OSCE commitments in cooperation with civil society. Therefore, I would like to use this opportunity to personally thank all of you here for your efforts and contributions. Ladies and gentlemen, during our chairmanship of the OSCE, Serbia has been devoted to further updating and strengthening the implementation of OSCE commitments in all 3 dimensions. In the 3rd dimension, we have paid special attention to the rule of law, national human rights institutions, freedom of expression and freedom of the media, including safety of journalists, freedom of religion or belief, freedom of assembly and association, protection of rights of persons belonging to national minorities, and promotion of tolerance and non-discrimination. Serbia's chairmanship started preparing deliverables for the Belgrade Ministerial Council earlier than usual in order to have enough time for conclusive and constructive debate among delegations. With this respect, I would like to encourage delegations to engage in that discussion in a constructive manner, underlining that our main goal should be adoption of substantive documents rather than the big number of decisions just reconfirming existing commitments. Your contributions and concrete recommendations will be valuable for our future steps towards Ministerial Council to be held in Belgrade on the 3rd and the 4th of December. Before concluding, I would like to underline the important role of the OSCE institutions, especially having in mind that only strong and professional institutions with adequate financial and human resources are able to assist participating states in implementing their OSCE commitments. Therefore, we have to create necessary conditions for fulfillment of their respective mandates. At the very end, let me thank once again to the distinguished representatives of the OSCE institutions and executive structures for their support and fruitful cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Minister and Chair, for your words and again for your personal presence here with us today. The next to take the floor, of course, is our Secretary General, Lamberto Zanni. Welcome, Lamberto. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Michael. Minister Dacic, Special Envoy Erler, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very glad to have an opportunity this year to speak at the very opening of the ODIHR team, not only because this is one of the key annual events of the OSCE, but especially because this is our main instrument for reviewing and fostering the implementation of OSCE commitments in the human dimension. And at the outset, I would like to thank, in particular, Director Link and his talented and dedicated team for organizing this important event, and to commend them for their tireless efforts to promote and to protect human rights and fundamental freedoms, which remain at the core of the OSCE's comprehensive and multidimensional concept of security. This meeting should inspire the entire OSCE community to support those efforts and to ensure that the human dimension remains an essential part of our daily work across the organization. And as we are all part of the same team, we should use all tools and all opportunities at our disposal to continue advancing human rights, democracy, and the rule of law in the OSCE area. We can do this most effectively if we speak with one voice within the organization and if we work together. An excellent example of how we recently have been successful when we joined forces has been the joint effort of the Secretariat and ODIHR to deepen OSCE cooperation with Belarus. By coordinating closely and developing a common and comprehensive approach, we were able to strengthen the engagement of the OSCE with this country much more effectively than if we had pursued separate agendas. By working together, we were able to achieve a new package of projects covering all three dimensions of the OSCE security concept and including cross-dimensional elements. And this was consolidated when Michael joined me in high-level meetings during a recent trip to Minsk. And we have much to gain by working together, including when we cooperate with external partners. And in today's increasingly complex world, the OSCE must reach out and work together with external partners. And civil society is one of the most crucial partners, as it helps multiply the impact of the OSCE's efforts, particularly in the implementation of OSCE human dimensional commitments by our participating states. I'm very pleased to see so many civil society organizations from so many participating states of the OSCE represented here today. Your contributions, your active participation are vital to our efforts to strengthen respect for human rights and promote democratic principles and the rule of law throughout the OSCE region, while stimulating the organization with fresh ideas and forward-looking recommendations. In this context, I would like to emphasize that youth organizations should play a key role. We need to engage young people today to encourage them to strive for a world with greater respect for human rights, fundamental freedoms, and the rule of law tomorrow. The role of youth is all the more urgent when we consider that violent extremism and radicalization that lead to terrorism, since it especially affects young people. Countering radicalization and violent extremism is not a task for governments and law enforcement agencies alone. It is a responsibility shared by all parts of the society. This is why last May I organized the Security Days conference on this topic to stimulate a wide-ranging and constructive discussion on how the media, education, interreligious, intercultural dialogue, and the empowerment of women and youth can effectively help to prevent and counter this phenomenon. And I was very pleased that ODIHR, and Michael personally was very supportive of this event, the High Commission on National Minorities and the Representative of Freedom of the Media, as well the Anna Lindh Foundation, co-sponsored and took part in this debate, which generated a number of proposals and recommendations for follow-up activities that the OSCE can undertake both on its own and with external partners. One immediate step I myself took at the Security Day event, together with the Serbian chairmanship, was to launch an organization-wide campaign to encourage and inspire us all to do our part to counteract radicalization and violent extremism. All OSCE structures, including institutions of field operations, participating states, partners of cooperation, as well as civil society, academia, religious institutions across the OSCE areas, are invited to rally around and promote a common slogan on OSCE United in Countering Violent Extremism. And this campaign will be featured throughout the HDIM sessions, and I invite you all to join in to express your support and spread the word online and offline. But violent extremism is only one of the many increasingly complex and interconnected challenges that the OSCE faces today. The crisis in and around Ukraine remains very high on the organization's agenda, requiring an unprecedented level of engagement both at the political level and on the ground to help de-escalate the situation. This crisis has further undermined trust and the spirit of cooperation among participating states, and it has opened a difficult and divisive debate about the consequences of violations of key OSCE principles and commitments, including in the human dimension. Despite these profound challenges, the OSCE has managed to hold true to its vision of comprehensive security and continues to support efforts to restore peace and stability, including by promoting dialogue and reconciliation. Indeed, the OSCE has mobilized all its structures and put its entire toolbox into action in the context of this crisis. All our institutions, the Secretariat and its Conflict Prevention Center, and of course our field operations, the Special Monitoring Mission, the Project Coordinator in Kiev, and the Observer Mission at 2 Russian checkpoints, are doing their part to achieve a lasting peace. The OSCE has once again demonstrated that it can respond rapidly and flexibly in times of crisis. The current refugee and migration crisis is another pressing issue that calls for a comprehensive, coordinated, and humane response from the international community and OSCE participating states. As an organization encompassing all of Europe and with strong ties in the Mediterranean and Asian regions, the OSCE can provide an important platform for cooperation. We have a significant role to play in making sure that migration does not become yet another divisive issue. Relying on its comprehensive and cross-dimensional security concept, the OSCE can offer specific expertise to deal with some of the root causes of migration, including conflict and poverty, as well as other challenges that are often intertwined with migration, such as human trafficking and smuggling, violent extremism and terrorism, and even climate change. We can also offer an inclusive forum for dialogue where our participating states, together with our partners for cooperation, can exchange ideas and explore common approaches to the crisis. This year's OSCE Mediterranean Conference will provide a platform for high-level discussions on how some of these interconnected issues affect the Mediterranean region and how the OSCE could help to address them. And I'm planning to hold a Security Days event on migration in early 2016 to stimulate forward-looking thinking for a more strategic and systematic approach to this phenomenon within the OSCE. In concluding, I would like to underscore that all of the security challenges that affect the OSCE area cannot be successfully addressed without genuine consideration for the rule of law and the protection and promotion of human rights. What is more, the challenges we face today are too big and too complex for any country or organization to tackle alone. We need a coordinated approach involving many different actors. First and foremost, civil society. But we also need to enhance coordination among the various parts of the OSCE itself. The HDIM provides the ideal forum to bring all these elements together to strengthen security for citizens, communities, and countries throughout the OSCE region and beyond. And I look forward to hearing about the results of your discussions over the next couple of weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, for your words and for the good cooperation, indeed. And among colleagues, I would like to pass the floor to Dunja Mijatovic, the representative for the freedom of the media. By the way, the last time that she is with us here in this function. Let me thank you, therefore, for the excellent cooperation. Dunja, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. Chairperson in Office, Excellencies, distinguished representatives of civil society, dear journalists, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased once again to be here in Warsaw at the 2015 Human Dimension Implementation meeting. The start of this quite unique event always carries with it a special energy, I would say. We know the difficulties this organization faces, we know the political realities. Yet here we are devoting significant time and effort to make sure that the event will bring us closer to our, as we say, mutual goals. To protect, and I hope also strengthen security, peace, and freedom in the OSCE region. The session on media freedom is only a few hours away. I trust that many of you will be able to attend and to listen about the problems we are facing on a daily basis in the OSCE region. The issues to discuss are numerous. The concerns are major, but the first step is to be crystal clear about each other's view and priorities in order to stop the further decline on media freedom and freedom of expression. We can't expect that the differences that participating states harbor about the role of freedom of expression and media freedom will magically disappear by the end of this event. But all participating states have something in common, and this is the commitments that they are themselves agreed, you all agreed, to honor when you join this organization. We know how powerful these commitments are on paper and what a difference they could make to the lives of citizens of the OSCE region. We are also aware of how few of them have been successfully implemented, unfortunately. It would be too easy, however, and I dare to say it would be also too cynical to accept that these days strong commitments will too often remain unfulfilled words on paper. We cannot continue talking about constructive dialogue if several states are constantly refusing to accept that there are grave problems in relation to fundamental freedoms, human rights in general, particularly freedom of expression and freedom of the media. Participating states must continue searching for ways to advance the values that we all hold so dear. And my institution is one of the tools that they can and should use in this process, but not by declining and saying that there is no problem in relation to freedom of the media and freedom of expression. Much like last year, my office continues to devote considerable time and resources to the issues arising from the crisis in and around Ukraine. We continue to provide specialized knowledge and resources for the media affected by the crisis. Over the course of the last 2 years, we have also provided a unique forum for Ukrainian and Russian journalists to meet, discuss, and try to resolve issues of mutual concern. We have played a significant role in providing advice to governmental authorities on media freedom issues, including legislation that is essential in this crisis situation. While circumstances require that we keep a close eye on Ukraine, the last year has presented far too many other challenges to free media and free expression across the entire OSCE region. As I said, since my time is quite limited, I will continue talking about problems on media freedom in detail during the session on media freedom at 3 o'clock. But I will classify the problems in 2 major areas. The first, as you know, is the continuing violence against members of media. My office held a large-scale conference in June on the topic, focusing especially on the Ukrainian conflict. The issues discussed and the lessons learned are applicable to all OSCE states. The message also is absolutely clear. Attacks on journalists are unacceptable, but they continue constantly. These cases of violence and harassment take several forms and create a major threat not only to the journalists, but also to freedom of expression in general, which we will address in the session in the afternoon. Second, also very worrisome and dangerous is the proliferation of laws that may have been designed to make our societies safer, but are drafted in ways that not only do not increase our safety, but indeed they do the opposite. If misused, they can silence pluralistic, well-informed debates which are essential if we want to continue living in a free and safe society. We cannot ensure security without respect for human rights, including the freedom of expression and freedom of the media. And we cannot enjoy our freedoms without security. Before I conclude, I would like to welcome the important campaign launched by the Secretary General and the Serbian chairmanship to counter violent extremism. It was already mentioned by our Secretary General. My office closely follows the media freedom implications of the efforts by participating states to fight violent extremism. In their legitimate efforts to create safe societies, it is of utmost importance that participating states recognize the essential role that the media can play in this issue. Violent extremism cannot be fought by silencing those informing the public about it. Protecting our fundamental freedoms, including freedom of expression and corollary right to freedom of the media, is essential in the fight against violent extremism. We need to ensure that there is a pluralistic and open debate on all issues in our society, especially on the controversial or difficult ones. We cannot move forward if we silence those voices, if we silence critical, provocative, and the voices we do not like. I trust that you will find the upcoming discussions, including our afternoon session, lively and thoughtful. And I hope that we will make progress on the ultimate goal, to protect and increase security, peace, and freedom in our societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Dunja, for your words. And let me pass the floor now to our High Commissioner on National Minorities, Astrid Thors. The floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Michael. Dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, also I am honored and delighted to participate here today. I wish to warmly thank the Polish government, but above all the ODIHR, for continuing to host the important meeting. I must, however, begin by recalling participants of my mandate. As you recall, it's essentially a conflict prevention one. Participating states have mandated the High Commissioner to provide early warning and take early action in order to prevent ethnic tensions from developing into conflict. But at the same time, however, participating states have acknowledged the inseparable linkages between minority rights, peace and stability. This connection is, as we say, a part of the OSCE DNA. Indeed, ensuring the respect for the rights of persons belonging to national minorities is essential for the prevention of conflicts. Key to addressing minority issues lies therefore in the full implementation of the relevant international commitments, including OSCE human dimension commitments related to the rights of persons belonging to national minorities. The interlinkage between minority rights, security and stability was further reaffirmed by the participating states in the CSCE Copenhagen document. This document, also 25 years anniversary today and adopted 25 years ago, represents a milestone in the protection of the rights of persons belonging to national minorities. It's to be noted that the starting point of the provisions related to national minorities in the Copenhagen document emphasized that questions relating to national minorities can only be satisfactorily resolved in a democratic political framework based on the rule of law with a functioning independent judiciary. This statement is more valid than ever. Unfortunately, we see today many instances where national minorities do not feel secure to seek legal remedy to their grievances. That is also why we have invited participants at the session devoted to the rights of persons belonging to national minorities on Thursday, the 1st of October, to discuss what can be done in order to guarantee access to justice for minorities. I hope practical examples will enrich the discussion. The Copenhagen document played a key role in the development of international norms for minority protection and paved the way for the creation of my institution. I would like to underscore that the Copenhagen document continues to be of crucial importance for minority protection. The commitments undertaken by participating states in the Copenhagen document remain highly relevant today and will remain so in the future. It also inspired the creation of other international documents, including with relevance for national minorities, like the Council of Europe's Framework Convention. Unfortunately, later on, we have seen that the inspirational force of the Copenhagen document has not been the same, as other binding multinational documents in the OSCE area have not been as clear regarding the rights of persons belonging to national minorities and the protection of their identities. Dear friends, let me now also, in my turn to the crisis in and around Ukraine and highlight in particular the situation in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. As you will have noticed, ODIHR, together with my institution and with the input from Dunya's institution, published last week the report on the Human Rights Assessment Mission on Crimea. As you know, we will present the report in more detail with Michael on Thursday here in Warsaw. But the assessment mission found that since the annexation of Crimea, the Crimean Tatar and Ukrainian communities have been subjected to increasing pressure on and control of peaceful expression of both their culture and their political views. The situation is particularly precarious for those who have openly opposed the annexation or refused to take Russian citizenship. The assessment mission had to base its evaluation mainly on interviews without visiting the peninsula. The report of the assessment mission contains a simple recommendation on how to improve this assessment methodology by granting access to relevant international actors to the peninsula. And in this context, as members of the PC might remember, I must reiterate my call on the Russian Federation authorities to facilitate my access to Crimea without further delay in order for me to make a first-hand assessment of the situation in line with my mandate. Dear friends, many previous speakers have mentioned the refugee crisis, and it's now really a focus of the international community, and it cannot but touch all of us. We see the human desperation and the political tensions that are rising as a consequence. We can all ask ourselves, why did not we listen to warnings that were issued? Warnings saying that the capacity of international organizations working in the neighboring countries of the conflict areas was drained. Once again, an international alert that was not listened to. But we also see that not all participating states have lived up to another commitment in the Copenhagen document, the commitment to take effective measures to provide protection against any acts that constitute incitement to violence against persons and groups based on national, racial, ethnic or religious discrimination, hostility or hatred, including anti-Semitism. The participating states also committed themselves to promote tolerance and understanding. This commitment is well reflected in subsequent OSCE decision, is followed by our dear colleagues in ODIHR, but also in the Council of Europe Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities, where the Article 6 is a direct continuation of the OSCE commitment to take effective measures to promote mutual respect and understanding between all persons living on their territory. Countries who have taken those commitments seriously are those that now in the refugee crisis treat all human beings with respect. My conclusion is that we must continue to work even more vigorously for promoting the understanding between all persons living on a country's territory. The Ljubljana Guidelines on Integration of Diverse Society, issued by my institution, is a good tool in this respect. Dear friends, however, we are also unfortunately witnessing an increased politicization and instrumentalization minorities issues in the OSCE era. There is also a growing tendency to view national minorities as objects for regulation rather than active participants in the society. These trends greatly worry me, as they risk jeopardizing the protection of the rights of persons belonging to national minorities and increase tensions in and between participating states. It is crucial that we promote the full implementation of international norms related to these issues. Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, all representatives here in the room, I look forward to our common deliberations at this meeting, and I wish us all a successful HDM. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, dear Astrid, also for the concrete examples from your work. We will hear more about all that in the working sessions. Dunja also mentioned it. The working sessions are about to begin already in the afternoon. Then, of course, going to the direct individual topics. And therefore, let me also, as the director of the hosting institution here, also conclude this series of introductory speeches with some remarks on our work and especially, of course, reflecting actuality. This increasing importance and increasing attention OSCE and institutions did get in this year and already last year during the Swiss chairmanship. Certainly, of course, well, that is not a privilege. No, it's more a duty. This increased attention comes with more responsibility. 2015 has been also already an extremely challenging year for us so far. We observed in ODIHR and are preparing to observe a record number of elections this year. We published an enormous number of reports and publications. Examples have been mentioned. And we have the privilege of hosting today and in the 2 weeks to follow a record number of almost 1,400 participants at this year's HDIM. This is indeed a record number. And while we were busy doing our work to the highest standards that we are expected to fulfill, we are also caught in a fascinating debate, certainly of reform our organization, including the discussions stimulated by the panel of eminent persons. To the outside world, the OSCE in general and its structures, offices, institutions may have appeared sometimes as a kind of a sleeping beauty for much of the second half of the last 25 years. But I think it is very important, therefore, that it was so important now that there is the possibility to make active use of all structures of OSCE in the crisis we are facing last year, this year. Questions, ladies and gentlemen, questions have been raised about the relevance in the past and the effectiveness of the OSCE. But I would argue that this crisis of relevance of the last decade has been less of a crisis of the operative effectiveness of the executive structures, but has been in reality a crisis of political decision-making in our decision-making bodies. During this time, the OSCE's executive structures, including ODIHR, have continued to develop as centers of excellence, enhancing their expertise, competence, and ability to deliver a meaningful human rights impact in many areas. The main reason the institutions have been able to further develop their capacities despite ever scarcer resources can be attributed to their status, which makes them autonomous in the execution of their mandate, as they can be tasked only by the participating states as a collective whole and not by any single or group of states. It is therefore of utmost importance, not only for the institutions themselves, but for the OSCE at large, that this autonomy is maintained and operational ability strengthened, not weakened, through adequate resourcing. Given that the main challenge to the institution's operational capacity, including in preventing and responding to emerging crises, rests with resources rather than mandate, the main question is how this challenge could be faced best. For 40 years, the very cornerstone of the OSCE as a regional security organization has been, it has been mentioned several times today, its comprehensive concept of security. The first security organization to put human rights and fundamental freedoms on par with principles on the inviolability of borders and territorial integrity. The participating states have committed themselves to protecting human rights and fundamental freedoms as the first responsibility of government in placing the human dimension at the core of OSCE's comprehensive concept of security. This fact makes the OSCE unique and sets it apart from other regional intergovernmental organizations, and it is precisely because all 57 participating states have both committed themselves to and repeatedly reaffirmed this, no strategy for strengthening the OSCE will work unless this concept is and remains at the core of the assessments and recommendations for reform. The importance of drawing upon all the tools the OSCE has at its disposal and the comprehensive concept of security was demonstrated to its fullest last year by the Secretariat in Vienna, by the RFOM, by the field offices, by the HCNM and ODIHR. During the crisis in and in Ukraine, that was a very good example, of course, of this capability to act and of working concretely together. The autonomous but coordinated human rights assessment mission, for example, of HCNM and ODIHR in March of 2014, then two of the largest international election observer missions ever in 2014 run by ODIHR. This, of course, together with the efforts of the SMM run by the Secretariat in Vienna, these were complementary efforts, each adding OSCE value. Despite decreasing resources, we will continue to work on becoming even more effective and even more reactive to address crises whenever and wherever they arise and prevent them whenever this is possible. Ladies and gentlemen, as we speak, it has been mentioned today already by other speakers, there is a new crisis confronting us in the human dimension of security, the refugee and migration crisis. In 2015 alone, more than 400,000 refugees from North Africa, the Middle East and South Asia have crossed into OSCE participating states across the Mediterranean scene, and this is of course by far not the end of the figure. It is much higher, of course, as we speak. Therefore, of course, this fact I think is clear that they are fleeing for many different reasons, for violence, poverty, persecution in their countries of origin, and they are in search of international protection. All of them, I think we have to be very clear, deserve humane treatment, respect for their basic human rights, as well as access to fair and efficient asylum procedures. As the sheer numbers of refugees challenges the capability of some of our participating states to accommodate them, and as most are insufficiently equipped to adequately respond to this influx of refugees, it is the time for solidarity among human beings, but also for solidarity among states, and also to fight the causes at the root of the refugee crisis. It is critical that we all recognize that the obligation of governments to respect human rights does not apply only to citizens of the OSCE participating states, but to everyone, to every human being, including migrants, asylum seekers and refugees. Therefore, strengthening barriers at our borders will not make the crisis go away. We must instead focus on providing dignified treatment and protecting the human rights of all people in need. And let me say also that clearly, the EU cannot solve this crisis alone. The OSCE also with its instruments will be needed in this effort. In Helsinki in 1992, the OSCE participating states recognized the need for international cooperation in dealing with mass flows of refugees and committed to ensuring the protection of and assistance to refugees with the aim of finding durable solutions. It is now time to redouble our efforts to fulfill these existing commitments. These commitments exist. Let us work to fulfill it. ODIHR stands ready to assist participating states to work on that, in fulfilling these commitments. In a combined effort in the last weeks of our departments, we have developed and are about to finalize a coordinated response to this crisis from our side, what we can do, that I would like in very few words to share with you in some basic elements. That would mean, for example, that we would prepare to deploy monitoring teams to several places most affected by the influx of refugees and asylum seekers to independently assess and report on the human rights situation there. We will organize, furthermore, an expert panel meeting on the safeguarding of rights of asylum seekers and refugees in the OSCE region, bringing together representatives of the affected community, distinguished experts from OSCE structures and institutions, international organizations, and our participating states. And of course, we are looking forward to closely cooperate with the Secretary General in what he was announcing today, this security days, of course, next year, where we will carefully prepare, of course, also our part, what we can do. And we will publish, certainly, our findings to make specific recommendations how to improve the implementation of the commitments in this field. I know that we at ODIHR can only contribute a modest share to solve this crisis. But I can assure you that we will do our utmost and use our strengths to contribute to safeguarding the human rights and the dignity of as many refugees as possible while supporting the participating states to manage this enormous challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure that this topic will be intensely discussed for the 2 weeks to come, among many, many others. But as I said, there's an incredible wealth of other issues to debate about in the human dimension of the security. I encourage you to join us in as many sessions as possible and in as many side events as possible. I can assure you it's worth it. I wish all of you and all of us an interesting and eventful human dimension implementation meeting. And I welcome again, of course, all of you, delegations, representatives of civil society. Your presence makes this meeting unique. Welcome to Warsaw. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, we now come to the statements of the delegations. We have right now already 13 delegations who want to take the floor. Let me please remind you of our... Yes, of course. Thank you, Chairman. Let me remind you of our rules, how we are working here in the opening session. Let me remind you that only delegations can take the floor in the opening session. And whoever wants to take the floor, please, many of you did already, please go to the speakers list at the back of the head table. It's over there, and signal, please, that you want to take the floor. After the delegations who now are taking the floor, we certainly have, as always, then the right to reply before we end the opening session at 1 p.m. with some technical remarks of ODIHR's first Deputy Director, Beatrice Balbin. So, having said that, we are coming now to the first delegation wanting to take the floor. This will be Luxembourg, followed by Canada. The distinguished representative of Luxembourg, Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Thank you. The declaration of the European Union will be presented by Gunnar Jan, and I would like him to take the floor now. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to speak on behalf of the European Union at this opening session of the OSCE Human Dimension Implementation Meeting. I deliver this statement also on behalf of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, on behalf of Montenegro, Iceland, Albania, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. First of all, the EU would like to express its appreciation to the Serbian chairmanship in office for its able leadership of the OSCE in this challenging year. Our gratitude goes also to the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights for the excellent preparation of this meeting, as well as its continued efforts to promote human rights and democratic values throughout the OSCE area. Mr. Chairman, 40 years after the signing of the Helsinki Final Act, its basic principles continue to be valid and relevant, as was said also by previous speakers in the opening. The OSCE, with its three-pillar approach, considers human rights as an essential factor in the promotion of peace, security, prosperity, as lasting security cannot be achieved without respect for human rights, the rule of law, and functioning democratic institutions. The EU recognizes the OSCE's comprehensive concept of security and the close interlinkage between security and human rights. Therefore, the EU appreciates and fully supports the OSCE work in human rights and election observation. The EU is committed to implementing the election observation mission's recommendations of OSCE ODIHR because we are convinced that their implementation contributes to strengthening democratic institutions and to improving electoral processes further. But despite the good work of the OSCE, we face a worrying trend of fundamental rights and freedoms being challenged in parts of our region. Conscious of this trend, the EU has adopted in July a new action plan on human rights and democracy, which puts special emphasis on ownership by and cooperation with local actors, institutions and mechanisms, including national human rights institutions as well as civil society. Allow me to refer to specific country situations. We remain deeply concerned by the serious human rights violations and abuses which continue in separatist-controlled areas of eastern Ukraine and the further deterioration of the human rights situation in the illegally annexed peninsula of Crimea. The EU reiterates a serious concern about the precarious position of persons belonging to national minorities, in particular Crimean Tatars, after the illegal annexation of Crimea. And we thank you for the report which has been established about the situation. The EU urges all sides of the conflict to ensure respect for international human rights and humanitarian law and calls for unimpeded access of the OSCE and other international organizations to all of Ukraine, especially the Crimea Peninsula and the Donbas. We fully support the work of the OSCE, particularly through the Special Monitoring Mission and its facilitating role in the follow-up of the Minsk agreements, which is key to a sustainable political solution in line with the OSCE principles and commitments and in full respect of Ukraine's sovereignty, unity and territorial integrity. We call on Russia to cease the illegal annexation of Crimea and Sevastopol and to use its influence over the separatists to meet their Minsk commitments in full. The EU remains concerned about the ongoing crackdown on civil society in Russia and the curtailing of fundamental rights and freedoms, especially the freedoms of expression and association, the repressions against the political opposition, and the harassment of independent media. In short, the human rights situation in the country falls short of Russia's OSCE commitments, international human rights obligations. The abduction of Estonian police officer Kova by the Russian security services on Estonian territory, his subsequent illegal detention and conviction constitute a clear violation of international law. The EU calls for his immediate release. The criminal cases brought against Oleg Sentsov, Sekolchenko and Nadia Savchenko and other persons illegally abducted from Ukraine and detained in Russia constitute a breach of international law and elementary standards of justice. We call on Russia to respect its international commitments and release without further delay all illegally detained Ukrainian citizens. The EU is encouraged by the release of the political prisoners in Belarus on 22nd August, which we believe represents important progress in the efforts towards improvement of relations between the EU and Belarus. The EU calls upon the government of Belarus to take the next steps and carry out a comprehensive review of relevant legislation, policies and practices to ensure its full compliance with international human rights obligations, responsibilities and commitments. The EU remains ready to assist Belarus in this regard, an offer we have reiterated during the Human Rights Dialogue in July. We see the presidential elections in October as an opportunity for Belarus to implement the recommendations by OSCE ODIHR and to live up to the expectations of the international community by offering a level playing field for all candidates. The EU welcomes that OSCE ODIHR could establish a substantial election observation mission. We also call on Azerbaijan to abide by its international obligations to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms and implement reforms to guarantee the rule of law and independent judiciary and access to fair trials for all. We regret the government's decision to close the office of the OSCE project coordinator in Baku, and the EU strongly believes that an OSCE field presence is an effective way for the OSCE to provide support in achieving necessary reforms. and promoting the modernization of the country, including in the areas of democracy and fundamental freedoms. The upcoming parliamentary elections on 1st November are an opportunity for Azerbaijan to implement the recommendations by OSCE ODIHR. We deeply regret that Azerbaijan placed restrictions on ODIHR's planned election observation for the forthcoming parliamentary elections, and we share the view expressed by ODIHR that the insistence on a restricted number of observers directly counters OSCE commitments as it is in contradiction to ODIHR's election observation mandate. This insistence has compelled ODIHR to cancel its election observation mission. We call on Azerbaijan to engage in discussions with ODIHR on how it can provide assistance to Azerbaijan in the implementation of its election-related and other OSCE commitments. The EU continues to be concerned about Uzbekistan's implementation of its OSCE human dimension commitments, notably those related to freedom of expression and freedom of the media, including safety of journalists and human rights defenders, and freedom of assembly and association. I will deposit the full length of the statement in written form, and I would like to finish the statement by referring to human rights, democracy, and the rule of law being at the heart of the EU external policy. But of course, we are also facing a number of challenges in protecting human rights and fundamental freedoms also within the European Union. This is the case, for example, in the fight against discrimination and xenophobia, and in the area of asylum and migration. The scenes that we have all witnessed in recent days on our borders and inside the European Union are unprecedented. We face a major challenge in managing the arrival of record numbers of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. But we are determined to meet this challenge whilst fully respecting our international commitments, managing our borders in full respect of our values, and upholding the human rights of migrants and refugees. We also remain firmly committed to the elimination of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, both within the EU and throughout the world. The EU and its member states constantly and consistently endeavor to ensure that the necessary legal framework and mechanisms are in place to meet these challenges. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much to the distinguished representatives of Luxembourg and the EU. Please let me say, I did not say that we have for you the recommendation and the time limit for 4 minutes in order to give every delegation who wants to take the floor this opportunity. I did forget it to say it in the first place, but of course now that is the 4 minutes you see ticking. This is to guarantee that we have enough time to have the right to reply in the end. Let me briefly read you the next delegation so that you can prepare. We have noted them in the order we were getting the requests, so it is exactly reflecting the order. The next delegation to take the floor will be Canada, followed by Liechtenstein, followed by the USA, followed by Turkey, followed by Switzerland, Norway, the Russian Federation, Tajikistan, Ukraine, Turkmenistan, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. That's for the time being. So the floor is to the distinguished representative of Canada, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you to ODIHR for delivering another great HDIM. When we met last September, Russia's illegal annexation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and support to illegal armed groups in eastern Ukraine figured prominently in our discussions. It will be the same this year as we keep hearing about the tragic consequences triggered by one participating state's decision to trample the very principles on which this organization is based. Over the past year, reports from trusted international organizations such as the UN and the Council of Europe, as well as from our own OSCE institutions, have time and again highlighted the tremendous human cost of Russia's ongoing aggression, in particular for those who find themselves caught in the middle of a senseless conflict, for the countless IDPs and refugees it has generated, and for those who resist or simply belong to national minorities, including Crimean Tatars. Canada has and will continue to stand with the Ukrainian people as they seek to build a democratic and united future. We salute the courageous work of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission in Ukraine for its contribution to peace and stability, as well as the tireless efforts of all OSCE institutions in support, inter alia, of free and fair elections, independent media, and national dialogue. Mr. Chairperson, colleagues, and representatives of civil society, whether we are standing against military aggression, combating terrorism, crime, and corruption, or seeking to protect the most vulnerable groups in our societies from violence and discrimination, our objectives can only be achieved by upholding our OSCE commitments based on universal values and human dignity for all. Canada particularly looks forward to this year's discussion on freedom of expression and freedom of the media, as well as the special discussion on ensuring that all rights and freedoms are protected online as well as offline. Attempts by some participating states to apply old methods using new technologies to consolidate power and quash dissent must be unequivocally denounced. As we strive to further the implementation of our commitments in the OSCE dimension, all stakeholders must be allowed to speak out. We need the voices of women and men united in the promotion of equal opportunities and participation in the political, economic, and social fields. We need the voices of people of all faiths in defending the rights to freedom of conscience and freedom of religion. We need the voices of all those who believe in dignity for all to denounce violence and discrimination against targeted minorities, including members of the LGBT community, at a time when some states fail to address, or worse, create the very conditions that enable hate and violence against minorities. We need the voices of free and vibrant civil society organizations, able to operate in a safe and enabling environment, free from hindrance and insecurity. And we need the voices of every citizen when they present themselves at the ballot box to democratically elect their representatives in what should be free, fair, and competitive electoral environments. With this in mind, we will be following very closely developments related to the October 10 presidential elections in Belarus. Mr. Chairperson, the OSCE HDIM provides a unique opportunity for civil society representatives to engage with participating states and to have their voices heard in the context of increased repression and retaliation by some participating states against activists, human rights defenders, and journalists. We look forward to hearing from members of the civil society in the coming 2 weeks. In the meantime, let me assure you, members of the civil society, that we have heard your silent protest this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. The next delegation to take the floor is Liechtenstein. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Sehr geehrter Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like, first of all, to thank the chairmanship of the OSCE and the Polish government, as well as ODIHR. Thank you for having organized this conference. We are meeting here in Warsaw and unfortunately must recognize once again the gap between our commitments to human rights and reality, which is only growing at a time when our attention goes towards considerable challenges for our region, including the flow of refugees and the armed conflict in Ukraine. We see that there is a decrease in the respect for civil and political rights as well as for freedom of expression. We must talk about these issues through a constructive exchange in the OSCE, and it is our hope that this conference will provide us with an opportunity to establish a clear picture together with our institutions and with civil society so that we can implement minimum standards once again in order together to find that foundation that we had defined as being necessary to our coexistence in conditions of security. Of course, ODIHR provides a very important contribution in this area. I'd like to highlight the role played by missions in the field. Now, when we look at human rights in conflict regions, especially in Ukraine, the work of the Special Monitoring Mission plays a central role in the human dimension and in policies of European security. In the framework of our multilateral development work, Liechtenstein provides a contribution to the ODIHR project on better protection of human rights and on strengthening the rule of law. Last year, we financed 2 important ODIHR activities by providing 80,000 Swiss francs to these funds in order to help participating states and to provide them with the necessary legal expertise in order to implement human rights protections. Protecting human rights in the context of the fight against terrorism is an important contribution to establishing minimum norms. This is done against the background of the dramatic phenomenon of foreign terrorist fighters. Liechtenstein is in favor of the OSCE having independent and effective institutions on the ground in this fight. In promoting the protection of children and rights of children, we also in Liechtenstein have ratified by consensus the first international convention of Lanzarote, which makes crimes against children and abuse of children criminally liable. The OSCE, in terms of implementing its security mandate, must ensure that its activities are effective. This is why Liechtenstein favors the continued work in the field on implementing UN conventions on protecting the rights of women and children in conflict situations. Liechtenstein is currently organizing on the 23rd of September at 1 p.m., together with Finland, Iceland, and Turkey, an event at which we can discuss examples for the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and its follow-up resolutions. We intend to show the important role played by women in peace and reconstruction and rehabilitation. It is only with the participation of women that we can arrive at strengthening security in Europe. We hope that you will all come to this event. Thank you.
Liechtenstein, also for the invitation. Now we have the delegation of the United States of America, followed by Turkey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Director, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. Among the principles at the heart of the Helsinki Act signed 40 years ago and key to the OSCE's success is the recognition that the human rights of all people in the OSCE countries are the legitimate concern of each and every OSCE participating state. Every participating state has both a right and a responsibility to speak out when abuses take place in other OSCE participating states. The signing of the Helsinki Final Act spurred courageous human rights defenders here in Poland and the Soviet Union and across Central and Eastern Europe to press for the implementation of commitments their governments had made, launching the Helsinki movement. Today, a new generation of brave women and men work tirelessly across the OSCE region, often risking their lives to realize those same rights, advance democratic development, and combat intolerance. Some of those courageous individuals are with us today. Thank you for defending human dignity and seeking to improve your respective societies. Sadly, some could not be here today because they have been unjustly imprisoned by their governments or otherwise prevented from traveling. The images of several of those individuals are represented by those wearing T-shirts over to my right, and we thank you for doing that. It is important to recognize human rights defenders because their condition is a bellwether for security in individual countries and for regional security. A government that respects human rights and fundamental freedoms of citizens has no need to imprison dissenting voices or silence independent media. Dissenting and independent voices hold leaders accountable, advocate for solving problems, and offer perspectives on how to do so. When governments stifle dissenting voices, they often attempt to justify such actions by instilling fear within their publics of internal or external threats. Nowhere in the region is this more evident than in Russia, where an increasingly authoritarian government has eroded the democratic institutions that ensure a government's accountability to its people. In Russia today, the space for civil society and human rights defenders is closing as the government increasingly uses the cloak of legislation to stigmatize and in some cases criminalize the work of NGOs. A largely state-controlled media is used to propagate fear, disinformation, and aggression. We see ongoing constraints on genuine political pluralism, as in the September 13th local elections, in which the authorities created significant barriers to the registration of political parties and electoral candidates, as well as to independent election observation. Its attempt to exert tight control over information and stifle independent views have created an environment conducive to Russian government aggression, including the invasion and occupation of Crimea and ongoing efforts to destabilize Ukraine. Despite Russian aggression in eastern Ukraine and the Russian occupation of Crimea, Ukraine has made tremendous progress in its efforts to transform into a modern, democratic, and prosperous country. We will continue to support reform efforts that benefit all Ukrainians. We expect the OSCE to continue to play an important role in the months and years ahead to help Ukraine stay on the course of peaceful domestic reform. Ukraine has made great progress in implementing its Minsk commitments. My government reiterates its unwavering support for the OSCE's efforts to support the implementation of the Minsk agreements between Russia and Ukraine. We urge the cancellation of sham elections in so-called separatist-controlled areas. Local elections in those regions should be conducted under Ukrainian law according to international standards and with observation by ODIHR as called for in the Minsk package. The massive crackdown on civil society in Azerbaijan is alarming. Human rights activists, journalists, and defense lawyers have been interrogated and incarcerated, and the health of several of those imprisoned is rapidly deteriorating. The Azerbaijani government has retreated from cooperation with OSCE institutions through its closure of the OSCE's Baku office and its insistence on limiting the number of ODIHR election observers. Our concern about disappeared political prisoners in Turkmenistan, which gave rise to the Moscow mechanism, is unabated. We welcome the delegation of Turkmenistan here today and look forward to engaging with it. Problems continue in Uzbekistan as well, and also Kazakhstan, where we lament actions taken by the government that limit political opposition, labor unions, and others. Mr. Chairman, we remain concerned about the erosion of democratic institutions and pressure on NGOs in Hungary. The Hungarian government has responded to the refugee crisis in a xenophobic, heavy-handed manner. Rather than constructively engaging with the EU to find solutions to the crisis, it deployed tear gas and water cannon against refugee and migrant families at its border with Serbia. We decry the disturbing continuation, at times violent, of anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim hate crimes and hate speech in the OSCE region. All participating states must respect and protect the inherent dignity of every individual. All of us must condemn and combat intolerance and discrimination against members of religious, racial, and ethnic minorities and members of other vulnerable groups such as LGBTI persons and people with disabilities. Recognition of our common humanity lies at the heart of our obligation under international law to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms. Last year at HDIM, keynote speaker Lisa Massimino challenged participating states to make concrete commitments with respect to actions by their governments, and the United States has accepted a number of her recommendations, and we're happy to provide details of those later on. Let me just say that the Department of Justice from the United States plans to provide a briefing in Vienna at the Hofburg on October 19th on U.S. government initiatives to foster collaborative police-community relationships and to reform law enforcement agencies with systemic problems. Participating states agreed to use HDIM to discuss implementation of our OSCE human dimension commitments, the United States intends to engage in a serious discussion over the 2 weeks here. Let us be productive, resist cynicism, and engage in discussions respectfully. Thank you very much.
I do thank the distinguished representative of the United States of America. The next delegation to take the floor is the distinguished representative of Turkey, followed by Switzerland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. The yearly HDIM, as the most important event in our human dimension calendar, provides an invaluable opportunity to review the implementation of these commitments across the entire OSCE region. The HDIM's great value also stems from the indispensable participation of civil society alongside the representatives of the participating states, giving all stakeholders the opportunity to voice their concerns and make recommendations. As was the case in 2014, the current HDIM is being held against the backdrop of the ongoing crisis in and around Ukraine. Regrettably, various human rights assessment missions, as well as our OSCE own institutions, continue to ascertain numerous and grave human rights violations in the eastern Ukraine and in illegally occupied Crimea. This underlines the importance of soberly assessing the implementation of our human dimension commitments. Turkey fully supports the focus on the implementation of existing commitments in the human dimension, which the Serbian chairmanship shares with its predecessor. It is our hope and expectation that the determined efforts of the chairmanship will lead to the adoption of valuable human dimension deliverables at the Belgrade Ministerial Council, notwithstanding the challenges posed by the crisis in and around Ukraine. While upholding our commitments in such crucial areas as human rights, fundamental freedoms, democratization, and the rule of law, Turkey continues to attach particular importance to addressing the alarming rise of racism, xenophobia, intolerance, and discrimination in the OSCE region. We are convinced that this area requires our organization's urgent and increased attention. Those considered to be different or other, whether on the basis of their ethnic background, their religious beliefs, or other reasons, are frequently subjected to harassment and violence, and their human rights and fundamental freedoms are thus violated. The current refugee crisis is exacerbating the already grave situation on the ground and having further negative repercussions on the perception of migrants. Mr. Chairperson, in your introductory remarks, you gave the number of refugees moving towards the OSCE participating states, probably focusing only on the recent wave of population movement from those countries like Syria towards the member states of the EU. Nevertheless, I may take this opportunity to remind the participants of this meeting that my country has been dealing with this problem for the last 5 years, since the outbreak of the civil war in Syria, with all the social and financial burden that it imposed on us. According to the UNHCR, Turkey is right now the biggest refugee hosting country in the world. The number of Syrians who have fled to Turkey exceeds 2 million. Let me assure you that this problem is not going to go away unless we address its root causes. We need to tackle the economic, political, social instabilities and conflicts in our neighboring geographies by supporting peace processes, promoting peaceful settlement of disputes, while stepping up humanitarian aid and development investments. My country remains ready and available to cooperate with all stakeholders to this end. We must all do more to strengthen the implementation of our commitments in the field of tolerance and non-discrimination if we are to have a realistic chance of eradicating the rising threat without approaching the human dimension selectively or by setting up artificial hierarchies. In this connection, we welcome the incoming German chairmanship's intention to prioritize the area of tolerance and discrimination. we also appreciate that this year's HDIM includes a special day on combating hate crimes and ensuring effective protection against discrimination. I would also like to emphasize our firm commitment to the goals of improving the rights of women, ensuring their full and equal participation in all spheres of life, strengthening their status in society, and eradicating violence against them. Looking forward to fruitful and constructive discussions in all the working group sessions, as well as the various side events. I wish the participants of the HDIM every success. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. We have now the next delegation who will be taking the floor, Switzerland, followed by Norway. Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in the coming 2 weeks, we will have the opportunity to discuss the progress made by our governments in implementing our human dimension commitments. Even more important, our discussions will also help us to identify the gaps of our implementation. A credible way for each participating state to do this is to analyze its own achievements and shortcomings before pointing fingers at others. By introducing the OSCE chairmanship self-evaluation last year, Switzerland and Serbia created a new tool in the OSCE to do exactly that. In close collaboration with civil society, Switzerland has analyzed the level of implementation of its commitments in the following 5 areas: election observation, tolerance and non-discrimination, freedom of expression and assembly, combating trafficking in human beings, and gender equality. The self-evaluation not only helped us to assess our progress, but also to identify areas where further action is needed. We are happy to see that the Serbian chairmanship and Germany, as incoming chair, will also implement this initiative. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the active participation of non-governmental organizations at the HDIM adds great value to our discussions. On the one hand, civil society organizations are monitors of the level of adherence to human rights standards, and on the other hand, they are alarm bells which reveal human rights violations. Our societies can only benefit from their vigilant eyes and critical voices. We welcome their participation and look forward to engaging in fruitful discussions with them. Unfortunately, recent developments show that the space in public life for active and independent civil society organizations is shrinking in many OSCE participating states. We are observing with great concern increasing restrictions towards the representatives of the civil society, human rights defenders, and journalists. These negative trends not only question the compliance with our common commitments, but also undermine the very nature of democracy. We welcome the tireless efforts of the OSCE executive structures, institutions, and field operation to counter these negative trends in the OSCE region. The work of ODIHR, of the Representative on Freedom of the Media, of the High Commissioner on National Minorities, of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, and of the field operations are, against that backdrop, more important than ever. Switzerland will continue to support them in their important tasks. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, it is high time to reinforce our commitments in order to strengthen human rights, democracy, and the rule of law in the OSCE region. However, we can only be successful if we extend our human dimension commitments to the new challenges which we face, such as refugee migration or youth and violent extremism. Concerning refugee migration, the OSCE executive structure, institution, and its field operations must do everything possible to support the protection efforts undertaken by local authorities and through UNHCR's activities, especially in transit countries. Concerning youth and violent extremism, we welcome the initiative of the Serbian chairmanship to continue last year's endeavors to elaborate an action plan on youth and security. At the same time, we need to reinforce our existing commitments in already well-known issues like the prevention of torture, gender equality, safety of journalists, and national human rights institutions. Switzerland will support the Serbian chairmanship in its engagement to bring to adoption decisions on these topics at the Ministerial Council in Belgrade. To conclude, I wish us all a fruitful, frank, and constructive exchange in the coming 2 weeks. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of the outgoing chairperson. The next delegation to take the floor is Norway, followed by the Russian Federation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and bearing in mind the time constraints, I will limit myself to only a few points of importance to my delegation. Chairman, HDIM is important because it gives civil society an opportunity to tell us what they see as the most pressing concerns and human rights violations. This is essential to tackle the gaps in implementations that we all have. HDIM is also an arena to learn from leading experts in human rights. My delegation has invited several experts for side events. Some are from a group not so often represented at HDIM, namely the practicing lawyers. Their experience is important for us. Mr. Chairman, we are concerned by the increasing pressure on civil society, including human rights defenders, lawyers, and the media in several OSCE participating states. Weakening independent civil society deprives citizens of the possibility to voice their concerns and interact with the governments in resolving them. Chairman, attacks on journalists are a threat to democratic development. The attacks are often intended to stop criticism of the authorities and exposure of corruption and abuse of power. Independent investigative journalism is vital for sound democracies. Mr. Chairman, in Ukraine, we have seen serious violations of fundamental commitments. This has led to a breakdown of justice and grave human rights violations, in particular in Donbass and in Crimea. The OSCE must continue to support the reform process in Ukraine. Respect for human rights, an independent judiciary, and fighting corruption must be priorities. All elections must be held in accordance with Ukrainian law, OSCE commitments, and the professional standards of ODIHR to have legitimacy. Mr. Chairman, the OSCE should have ambitious and updated commitments in all dimensions, not least in the human dimension. We therefore support the chairmanship's intention to negotiate new decisions for Belgrade, in particular on prevention of torture, enhancing safety of journalists, fundamental freedoms in the digital age, tolerance and non-discrimination, and an addendum to the Gender Action Plan. Mr. Chairman, the many side events are an important part of the HDIM. We are ourselves organizers, co-organizers, or sponsors to side events on protection of journalistic sources, on combating enforced disappearances, on the role of media in the integration of society, on the fight against torture, as well as on propaganda. We hope to see many of you at these events. Mr. Chairman, finally, many speakers before me have touched upon the issue of migration. This is indeed a very important topic also for the OSCE. I very much look forward to an opportunity to discuss migration when the three committees have a joint meeting on, I think it's 6th of October. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. The next delegation to take the floor is the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation, followed by Tajikistan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, distinguished colleagues. We are grateful, first of all, to the OSCE chairmanship for their preparation of this meeting. Now, Of course, the creation of a universal system for the protection of human rights was one of the most important results of victory in the Second World War, the 70th anniversary of which the world celebrates this year. Humanity must remember the disastrous consequences that can accompany attempts to establish global domination, belief in one's own exceptionalism, and disregard for moral norms and rights. Unfortunately, the vaccine against the Nazi virus, which was formulated at the Nuremberg Tribunal, has seriously weakened. Dangerous trends of rewriting history are gaining ground, as is the glorification of Nazis and their collaborators. This past 11th September in the Latvian city of Il, a monument was dedicated to the Latvian Forest Brothers from among the members of the Latvian Legion of the Waffen-SS, who were guilty of murdering civilians. This took place in the full support of the authorities. So the consequences of such political short-sightedness can be tragic, as is shown by the conflict in Ukraine. We expect for both ODIHR and the High Commission on National Minorities to take a more active position on these issues. In many OSCE countries, immunity to radical ideology has been artificially weakened, in part under the slogan of respect for the freedom of expression. The events in Ferguson and a number of other American cities graphically demonstrated the acute nature of the chronic issues of racism and segregation. Special attention should be focused on the task of protecting the rights of national minorities, especially the so-called non-citizens in Latvia and Estonia. Mr. Chairman, it seems to us that it is inadmissible to speculate on human rights in order to achieve narrow political goals. One example of this is provided by the internal Ukrainian conflict provoked by the U.S. and the countries of the European Union. It was precisely the U.S. and the EU, in violation of the Helsinki Principles and the UN Charter, who promoted the anti-government coup in Kiev and the punitive operation in the east of Ukraine. As a result, thousands of people have been killed and more than 1 million people have fled their homes. Even now, the numerous crimes against civilians committed on Kiev's Maidan, in Odessa, in Mariupol, and in other Ukrainian cities and towns have yet to be investigated. There is a frontal attack on freedom of speech. Journalists who are reporting to the world about the truth regarding the bloody events in Ukraine are harshly persecuted. The Ukrainian military continues to shell peaceful cities and towns in the Donbass, creating civilian victims. We are disturbed by the ODIHR's lack of reaction to these crimes. Why do the Bureau and its directors so zealous in their criticism of governments that are disagreeable to Washington or Brussels? Why, in this case, are there dismissive, insignificant remarks? Why is ODIHR not hastening to support the rights of residents of Crimea to self-determination as a result of a democratic referendum? The answer is clear. We are dealing with double standards, hypocrisy, and an attempt to cater to the opportunist interests of certain groups of countries. The recent one-sided, politicized ODIHR HCNM report on Crimea is a characteristic example. The preparation of this report without a decision from OSCE participating states. This is a direct violation of the mandate of the OSCE's executive bodies and in violation of the OSCE's norms and working principles. The use of the terms in the report, occupation and annexation with respect to Crimea, is absolutely unacceptable. This report testifies to the fact that ODIHR and the HCNM have autonomously taken an anti-Russian position, openly pandering to Kiev and its Western patrons. Such confrontational approaches have a negative effect on the authority of the Bureau and the High Commissioner and undermine trust in them. It is perfectly obvious to us that the developing practices and the entire philosophy of work of these institutions must be reviewed and their mandates reformed. Mr. Chairman, the profession of journalist remains one of the most dangerous, especially in conflict situations, armed conflicts. Unfortunately, some states are rendering a journalist's situation even more vulnerable. Recently, the U.S. Department of Defense revised the Law of War manual, defining reporters as some kind of unprivileged belligerence, which actually allows the U.S. military to attack and even to kill journalists. Such an approach has long been a usual practice on the part, unfortunately, of the Ukrainian security forces, who expel, kidnap, torture, and kill journalists who are truthfully covering the situation in Ukraine. A new achievement by Kiev was the recent inclusion of correspondents from a wide range of countries in a so-called sanctions list, forbidding their entry into Ukraine. On false pretext, reporters are expelled from Moldova as well and are refused accreditation in Latvia. It is worth noting that the OSCE representative on the freedom of the media reacts very rarely or feebly to this kind of violation. Mr. Chairman, another issue that I must raise here is that of Christians, which are one of the most vulnerable categories of the population, and not only in the Middle East and North Africa, where the Western powers have had a hand in the incitement of hatred and in the spread of the cancerous tumor of ISIL. We see the phenomena of banditry, intolerance, and discrimination in a number of OSCE participating states, especially Western states, where Christians are still a majority. Protection of Christians should become an important area of the OSCE's work, together with countering anti-Semitism and intolerance to Muslims. The OSCE conference on this topic, held in May of this year, made a large contribution in this area. Now, another issue that we have heard mentioned here today is the influx into Europe of refugees from the Middle East and North Africa. We consider this phenomenon to be the result of the irresponsible interference by Western powers in the internal affairs of states in the region, with the goal of violently overthrowing governments not in favor. People are not fleeing from dictatorial regimes. They are fleeing from terrorists committing monstrous crimes there. And we do not understand the behavior of the European Union countries, which, despite their humanitarian commitments, are building protective barriers and holding refugees under inhuman conditions. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I should like to say, with respect to the comments made by the representative of the European Union and a number of other delegations, specifically the US and Canada, I would like to recall my distinguished colleagues that Crimea is an indivisible part of the Russian Federation, and the so-called annexation remarks regarding Crimea recall the rhetoric of the Cold War. We note the politicized nature, and the population of Crimea laughs at these allegations. We have, on a number of occasions, made these remarks to participating states of the OSCE, and we consider their stance and their comments to be unconstructive. In order to continue constructive dialogue within the OSCE, we hope that this will be changed. Thank you.
Thank you to the delegation of the Russian Federation. The next delegation to take the floor is the distinguished representative of Tajikistan, followed by the Ukraine.
Ladies and gentlemen, to begin with, I would like to welcome all participants and to express gratitude to the government of Poland and the staff of the OSCE for having set up very good conditions for our work. Human rights, of course, are an extremely high value that's at the center of our attention here over these 2 weeks. The states parties to the OSCE want to guarantee these human rights. We try to develop new approaches in order to ensure more effectiveness of our work. It is known to all, of course, that no countries have found ideal forms of democracy, so an annual meeting of this kind, which comes up with recommendations based on the experience of certain states, can be extremely valuable. And so we assess very highly our participation in this organization and contribution to the decisions it takes. Various bodies of the UN and the OSCE make their recommendations, and on that basis we set up our national action plans, and this is being done on a regular basis. Every half year the responsible ministries report on their human rights guarantees to the president. That is made available on the internet, and is also submitted to civil society organizations and international organizations. Through April and May of this year, we had 6 rounds of consultations on a national level with various civil society and international organizations involved. In the course of these consultations, the shortcomings that we have encountered in implementation of various recommendations were identified and solutions were proposed. Tajikistan is making very concrete steps to guarantee human rights. We have an office of the president which deals with these issues, and in particular concentrating on the rights of children, and shortly we'll be setting up an institute of an ombudsman on children's rights, and we are also working on a draft law in this regard. And these various structures aim to improve the situation and, of course, to implement our international commitments. In closing, I would like to wish all participants in this meeting a very fruitful event. Thank you.
Very much to the delegation of Tajikistan. Next delegation to take the floor is Ukraine, followed by Turkmenistan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. The delegation of Ukraine joins previous speakers in expressing gratitude to the OSCE Chairmanship and the ODIHR for their efforts in organizing the 2015 Human Dimension Implementation Meeting. We also thank the Polish government for its hospitality. Distinguished participants, regretfully, for the second consecutive year, this meeting takes place at a particularly challenging time, when there is a need to strengthen the comprehensive response to the grave threats to security and human rights in Europe caused by the Russian military aggression against Ukraine. Russia's illegal occupation of Crimea and ongoing aggression in Donbass clearly demonstrate that violation of international law by one participating state causes serious damages to democratic stability and peace in the whole Europe and beyond. Due to the Russian aggression, 7% of Ukrainian territory is temporarily uncontrolled by the government of Ukraine, and according to the UN estimations, since mid-April 2014, almost 8,000 people have been killed and at least 18,000 injured. Over 1.5 million Ukrainians' population are internally displaced and regional infrastructure heavily destroyed. Ladies and gentlemen, Ukraine welcomes and supports the important role of the OSCE and its autonomous institutions as part of international efforts aimed at assisting Ukraine's government in addressing Russian aggression against Ukraine. We highly value the role of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission set up upon the request of the Ukrainian government. The situation with human rights in the occupied Autonomous Republic of Crimea and in uncontrolled territories of Donbass is critical. International Human Rights Monitoring Mission, UN, OSCE, and the Council of Europe report systematic violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms in these affected regions. In order to make sure that justice is served, Ukraine recently recognized the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court on crimes against humanity and war crimes committed since the beginning of the Russian aggression. We welcome the recent report of the ODIHR HCNM Human Rights Assessment Mission on Crimea, undertaken upon the request of the Ukrainian government in July 2015, which documented numerous credible, consistent, and compelling accounts of human rights violations in Crimea under the Russians' illegal occupation, and thereby substantiated the negative developments on the peninsula since its attempted annexations by Russia in 2014. Violence against independent journalists, dissemination of the Russian state propaganda by the Russian media on the territory of Ukraine, as well as defiance of norms of journalistic ethics and falsifications by the Russian media reporting on the situation in Ukraine are severely undermining the OSCE principles and commitments. We are convinced that more efforts should be done within the OSCE to counter Russian propaganda. It is critical to continue close and permanent monitoring of the human rights situation in Crimea and provide a strong reaction to unacceptable cases of serious human rights violations. We reiterate the need for the OSCE institutions' visits to the occupied Crimea, which should be undertaken in line with the UN General Assembly resolution on territorial integrity of Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, the delegation of Ukraine reiterates its resolute protest against the ongoing unlawful actions of the Russian Federation towards Nadia Savchenko, Oleg Sentsov, Alexander Kolchenko, and other Ukrainian citizens who had been abducted from the territory of Ukraine and illegally detained by the Russian authorities on trumped-up charges. Dear colleagues, in spite of the ongoing Russian military aggression, Ukraine stands committed to the chosen course of profound transformation, in line with the OSCE commitments and other international standards. The ongoing reforms process in Ukraine is of comprehensive nature and encompasses numerous areas, in particular the constitutional reform, including decentralization, reforms in the judiciary and public service, good governance and anti-corruption, security sector and police reform. As we approach the local elections in Ukraine, scheduled for the 25th October, and the OSCE ODIHR election observation mission commence its activities in Kyiv on 9 September, let me reiterate that the Ukrainian authorities are committed to holding free, fair and democratic elections in accordance with the national legislation and OSCE commitments. We are confident that the OSCE must continue to spearhead its efforts towards protection and promotion of human rights and fundamental freedoms in light of current grave challenges to human dignity and security in the OSCE region resulting from Russia's aggression against Ukraine. We hope that the discussion at the AGM will contribute to stimulating Russia's return to the tenets of international law and its good faith implementation of the OSCE human dimension commitments, which stay at the core of our collective security. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. The next delegation to take the floor is the distinguished representative of Turkmenistan, followed by Armenia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. First of all, let me express gratitude to the OSCE's ODIHR for the excellent organization of our work. To begin with, I would like to stress the fact that in recent years, Turkmenistan has been giving new impetus to its cooperation with the OSCE, the EU, and the European Parliament in the humanitarian sphere, which is an integral part of the work being done in our country to ensure further democratization of social life. Dear participants in this meeting, in the process of changing its political system in Turkmenistan, we are seeing new political parties being created. In addition to the Democratic Party, there is now a party of industrialists and entrepreneurs and an agrarian party. This process of creation of new political structures is resulting in more political activism of the population and the setting up of new civil society institutions, which are being very active. As an important event in our internal political life, we have this process of constitutional reform that started in May of last year. On 10 September of this year, there was a meeting of the Council of Elders that was personally attended by the President of Turkmenistan, Mr. Berdimuhamedov, who proposed that there be new additions to the basic law, to the constitutional law, that would constitutionally guarantee matters such as political pluralism, the guarantee of the state for the development of civil society, the rule of law, and many others. And this is associated with implementation of recommendations from the Universal Periodic Review. In particular, we've been working since the beginning of this year on a draft law for a human rights ombudsman, which shows how attached we are to implementing the Rome Statute Institute recommendations. And by the end of this year, we expect to adopt a national plan on human rights. So we are implementing our international commitments through the provision of national reports to various organs of the UN. Gender equality is extremely important for us as well. The women in Turkmenistan represent 46% of all workers, and at various levels of governmental administration, we have 25.4% women working. In January of this year, a national plan on gender equality was adopted. One of the spheres of legal reform has to do, of course, with improving the penitentiary system. From 2011 to 2015, we allocated $40 million US for renovation and modernization of penitentiary institutions, including the purchase of medical equipment. And a lot of attention is being paid to training the staff of the penitentiary system. And in this connection, Turkmenistan is exchanging experience with other countries through the OSCE and others. And as a result of this, over the last 3 years, some 2,000 employees of the penitentiary system participated in training seminars and courses. Together with the OSCE, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and other international groups, humanitarian work has been done in our penitentiary institutions. For example, in accordance with our plan, representatives of the International Red Cross and the OSCE have visited 5 penitentiary institutions, and this work is continuing. As we speak, the representatives of the diplomatic missions of the U.S., Great Britain, and others are visiting various prisons in the country. Now, you are familiar with the various structures that are interested in obtaining information about particular prisoners. They want to obtain information about their status or to have them released. Now, it might be mentioned that over the last 2 years, Turkmenistan has engaged in active dialogue on this with various bodies of the UN, the EU, and others. As a result of this, some 1/2 of the citizens on the lists that have been submitted have either been released or information has been provided about their status. As an example, I might mention Mr. Ananyazov, who was recently moved to a prison in the city of Tejen, and it is possible there for members of his family to obtain information about his status and to meet with him. And all of this shows, I think, that Turkmenistan is very interested in a dialogue on a fully equal basis and not a monologue when it comes to human rights. I must say that I'm quite surprised by the comments that have been made by the United States about the increase in the number of political prisoners. I mean, the representative of such a major country really should speak on the basis of concrete and verified facts. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to draw attention to the development of our social policy. Turkmenistan is providing social advantages to its population that have no comparable analogs in worldwide practice. Look at the figures. Over the last 8 years, the average wage has increased 10% per year. By the end of this year, 12 hospitals, 20 clinics, 21 kindergartens, 31 schools, 14 cultural centers, and 4 sports schools will be built. And next year, we'll be building 12 hospitals, 27 clinics, 16 kindergartens, 40 schools, 7 cultural centers, 5 towns, and 5 villages. In accordance with our national program on transformation of rural areas by 2020, we will be building housing in an amount of a total 3 million square meters, also 44 hospitals, 72 healthcare homes and centers, 260 schools, etc. Now, I just have one question. Who is this being done for? Just for some small privileged group? No, not at all. It's being done for the whole society and for future generations. That must be understood and properly taken into consideration. Thank you for your attention.
Turkmenistan. Next delegation to take the floor is Armenia, followed by Azerbaijan. And let me just flag that for the moment, for the time being, that is the 2 last delegations who were asking for the floor. After that, we will come then to the right to reply, which at the moment has only 1 delegation asked for. But first of all, the floor is to the distinguished representative of Armenia.
Thank you, Mr. Director. In this HDM, my delegation particularly values the opportunity to address the issues related to tolerance and non-discrimination, freedom of religion and protection of religious groups, freedom of expression and protection of journalists, freedom of movement, combating torture and other degrading treatment in the OSCE area. We are glad to note that some outcomes of our discussions will be also addressed in the framework of the Belgrade Ministerial Council. In our view, these themes are intrinsic part of comprehensive security. in paying particular attention to these fundamental freedoms, we are sending a strong message of embedding the protection of human rights into the overall European security. While acknowledging the role of international and regional cooperation in promoting human rights, we should remember that this link is reflective. The emergence of a strong human rights culture will bring more cooperation in sustaining and achieving peace and reconciliation along dividing lines. Conflicts should not be used as an excuse for maintaining and even worsening poor record of human rights. Conflicts can and should be resolved on the basis of human rights. The existence of the independent civil society is essential in promoting peace and reconciliation, as much as coercive measures aimed at silencing civil society deepens mistrust and gap between peoples. In this year of the 40th anniversary of the signing of the Helsinki Final Act, it is important to reaffirm our full adherence to the all principles, but particularly to the respect for fundamental freedoms and the equal rights and self-determination of peoples, since these principles are embedded in human dimension commitments. 2015 marks another important anniversary. Armenia and Armenians all over the world have been commemorating the centenary of the Armenian genocide, joined by world leaders, parliaments, and people who identify themselves with humanity and civilization. Remembrance and education of genocide is an important OSCE human dimension commitment. We are pleased to note that this year, United Nations, first at the level of the Human Rights Council and then General Assembly, adopted resolutions on genocide prevention and setting up an International Day of Commemoration and Dignity of Victims of the Crime of Genocide and Prevention of this crime. These resolutions clearly establish that remembrance is an important part of reconciliation and genocide prevention. Unfortunately, in the OSCE neighboring areas nowadays, Christians, along with other religious groups, face massive and grave human rights violations perpetrated by terrorists and foreign terrorist fighters. This threat is existential, and it should be approached within efforts of genocide prevention. We appreciate the intention of the Serbian chairmanship to introduce draft decision on protection of Christians in the OSCE and beyond, and we are ready to actively contribute here. In concluding, let me refer to the modalities of our participation to HDIM. Armenia is ready to engage in mutual monitoring with all OSCE participating states without exception, as well as to enter into dialogue with representatives of independent civil society. What we are not ready is to engage with organizations which are created to occupy the place of independent civil society. With this in mind, we welcome all participants of HDIM and to look forward to meaningful dialogue. I thank you, Mr. Director.
Thank you very much to the delegation of Armenia. The next delegation to take the floor is the distinguished representative of Azerbaijan, and then we forward to the rights to reply. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Director. First of all, Azerbaijani delegation would like to join the delegations to thank the Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs at the host country, ODIHR, and OSCE Chairmanship in Office for organizing such an event. But before we proceed to the sessions, we would like just to express our concern. Azerbaijani delegation expresses a profound objection to participation of non-governmental organization European Center for Artsakh based in Berlin, Germany, in the work of the HDIM. This NGO is associated to and actively promotes the illegal regime established in the occupied territories of the Republic of Azerbaijan through use of force against the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Republic of Azerbaijan, accompanied by heinous crimes including ethnic cleansing, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and acts of genocide committed against innocent civilian population of the Nagorno-Karabakh region and other occupied territories of Azerbaijan. As a result, about 1 million civilian Azerbaijans were forcefully expelled from their homes and continue to be deprived of their basic human rights and fundamental freedoms. Mr. Chairman, as Europe is discussing, our region is discussing the refugees from Syria, but we have been having this problem for 10 years. In this context, the participation of the mentioned organization in the work of HDIM would be tantamount to endorsing the results of violations of human rights of about 1 million Azerbaijanis, which is by no means in line with the principle that the OSCE stands for and is contrary to the very aim of this event. The delegation of the Republic of Azerbaijan would like to emphasize that CSCE Helsinki Document 1992, Chapter 4, envisages that provisions of this document regulating relations of CSCE with non-governmental organizations would not be applied to persons or organizations which resort to the use of violence or publicly condone terrorism or the use of violence. We would like to recall OSCE Bucharest Document 2001, which recognizes separatism as one of the root causes of terrorism and as a factor contributing to creation of conditions conducive to terrorism. Therefore, participation of NGOs which promote separatism and ideas contradicting the core values of OSCE in the work of our organization is against the principle and rules and procedures of OSCE and cannot be allowed. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the distinguished representative of Azerbaijan. We would now, as we have no more delegations taking the floor in the statements round, move on to the right to reply according to our rules of procedures. There, meanwhile, I have 3 delegations who would like to reply. They are in the order of their coming in onto our list here. It's Hungary, Azerbaijan, and Turkey for the time being. So, Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We fully align with the statement of the EU. However, I would like to add a few observations in my national capacity. Hungary has done its best over the past weeks defending the European borders coinciding with her national borders. We work closely with surrounding countries, and our commitment is to help deal with the migration crisis in a lawful manner. That includes refugees and migrants using legitimate checkpoints, getting registered, and abide the laws of the host country. The events quoted in the US statement were initiated following a sustained and violent attack on the state border by a large number of migrants who previously crossed several safe countries. The incident was duly reported by the OSCE mission to Serbia in a spot report. The restrained and proportionate police operation aimed at ending the situation only, which it did. A similar situation at the US-Mexico border would call a similar, if not more forceful response from the US Border Patrol, and we would consider it lawful and legitimate. The Hungarian delegation will give detailed information for participating states under Working Session 11. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, to Hungary for this reply. Next delegation in the right to reply, take the floor, is Azerbaijan, followed by Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There were some comments regarding Azerbaijan, and I would like first to exercise the right of reply regarding the election observation mission comment. On July 14, the government of Azerbaijan, honoring the OSCE commitments, extended an invitation to the OSCE ODIHR to observe the upcoming election. Following the need assessment mission report, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Azerbaijan communicated in writing substantial concerns over the findings and recommendations of NAM. The Azerbaijani side questioned the validity of OSCE ODIHR findings and urged the ODIHR to ensure that the number of STOs and LTOs is reasonable. Given the fact that the parliamentary assemblies of the OSCE and the Council of Europe also expressed their interest to deploy respective election observation missions. Taking into account elections practiced in the wide OSCE area and ratio of LTOs and STOs to the size of population and electorate, Azerbaijan suggested the OSCE ODIHR revising its NAM report and informed the director of ODIHR that the permanent mission of Azerbaijan to the OSCE stands ready for consultations on the matter. Unfortunately, the OSCE ODIHR refused hearing to the concerns of Azerbaijan and rejected our proposal to engage in consultations on these debatable recommendations. Azerbaijan has always maintained a dialogue and cooperation with ODIHR despite many disagreements. But we consider that the concealing observation mission to the parliamentary election in Azerbaijan is a serious violation of the mandate of the ODIHR. First, according to Helsinki 1992 document, the OSCE ODIHR's main role in election-related area is to assist the OSCE participating states to implement their human dimension commitments, in particular through receiving any comments from states visited by the CSCE missions. Those failed by the OSCE ODIHR to address the shortcomings communicated by Azerbaijan that expected the ODIHR, rendering its assistance in an attempt to infringe upon the sovereign rights of the OSCE participating state. Secondly, the ODIHR refusal of Azerbaijan's offer for consultations and attempt to impose its own questionable findings is contrary to the spirit of our organization, which stands for dialogue and cooperation. Thirdly, the OSCE ODIHR is not a decision-making body to take such a decision on its own without consulting the chairmanship of OSCE participating state concerned. Second, there was, I think, if I have time, could I just continue on labor concerns?
Well, this is of course an open question and difficult to answer.
We
have three other delegations to take the floor, so please come to.
Okay, just a remark regarding the OSCE project coordinator in Baku. As it is known that the OSCE project coordinator in Baku was the recall of the ambassador Shakhtartinsky from the position of the head of the OSCE project coordinator in Baku was taken without any consultation with the host nation authorities, and it was really a surprise for us. The government of Azerbaijan as a host nation exercised its right for sovereignty, and as it is enshrined in the Helsinki Final Act of 1975, and expects it to be respected by the OSCE. Azerbaijan as the host nation hadn't been able to get any answer or reasonable explanation to our questions on the short-term extension of his mandate. We were satisfied with Ambassador Shakhtartinsky's activity, and the projects he realized, in fact, were helpful for Azerbaijan. But we regret that he was called because of his rejection of taking steps beyond the mandate and of his resistance to pressure by some delegations to make him act in contravention to mandate adopted by all 57 OSCE participating states. Thank you, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you to the delegation of Azerbaijan. I have now four, and then of course we have to, four former delegations who want to reply. There is first Turkey, then Armenia, Latvia, and United States of America. Please, first to the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I wish to exercise our right of reply to the intervention by the representative of Armenia, with its reference to the events of 1915. Turkey's views on the tragic events that took place in 1915 are well known. They have been voiced on a number of occasions. The final years of the Ottoman Empire were a time of suffering for all peoples in the empire. Turks and Armenians were not spared. The background of this controversy differs in the memories of Turks and Armenians. However, one-sided narratives based on wholesale accusations do not serve the purpose of attaining closure. We want the truth to be our guide. Our archives are open. Our proposal for a joint historical commission to go through all the documents in all relevant archives remains valid. We wish for a joint examination of all documents in order to develop a common understanding as to what took place during that unfortunate period. But unfortunately, in response to terms such as joint and common and engage, terms which emphasize dialogue and cooperation, we hear only one term in return, as we did today, genocide. Yet I wish to emphasize yet again that there is simply no case for genocide. We must keep in mind that genocide is a very, very narrowly defined legal term that needs to be proven before and established by a competent court, not by any other person or instance or institution or NGO, regardless of their credibility, respectability, or any other attribute. We hope that the Armenian side will at one point abandon their one-sided rhetoric that aims to advance a narrow-minded, exclusivist narrative and meet us in our quest to jointly establish the truth and to respect it accordingly. Thank you.
Thanks to Turkey. Next delegation to take the floor is Armenia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I would like to exercise my right of reply with regard to two interventions made by delegations of Turkey and Azerbaijan. First, Turkey. We took note of the statement of Turkish delegate, which is a simple form of denial of the genocide. One cannot call the elimination of the entire race from its ancestral homeland as nothing less than genocide. And you have to cope with this. It is your history, and you have to name things by their names. And when it comes to genocide denial, I would like to emphasize that this year's Human Rights Council resolution clearly expresses its point, and it's first time that genocide denial is addressed in the resolution. It says that it notes with concern that attempts to deny or to justify the crime of genocide may risk undermining the fight against impunity, reconciliation, and efforts to prevent genocide. Denial of genocide does not bring us close to reconciliation. It furthers us from reconciliation. Second, I would like to refer to the points made by Azerbaijani delegation. Azerbaijan has already cracked down completely with own civil society, and the persons who represented independent civil society of Azerbaijan and who took place in HD meetings in 2013 and 2014 are already in the jails. And now Azerbaijan wants to do more, to crack down on NGOs beyond its jurisdiction. Azerbaijani delegation tries to promote its human rights standards, but rather heed to the calls of international community. We think that the NGOs which represent views of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh should be welcome here. We should listen each other, and we should learn to operate in the atmosphere of freedom of expression, even in HDIM. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Armenia. Next delegation to take the floor is Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would like to exercise Latvia's right of reply with regard to the statement made by the Russian Federation. Apparently, the Russian Federation, for once again, purposefully was misinforming international community on the actual situation in Latvia. But we are all aware that misinformation forms the basis of Russia's foreign policy, and suggestions of neo-Nazi tendencies in Latvia is just one example. Just to state once again that Latvia has consistently condemned war crimes and crimes against humanity committed during the time that Latvia was occupied by the totalitarian regimes of USSR and Nazi Germany, and we commemorate the victims of those regimes. And my second remark will be related to Russian representatives' comment regarding restrictions of the freedom of expression and media in Latvia. And it deals with recent decision by the Latvian State Enterprise Register to deny the registration of the news agency Russia Today, and this decision was based on national normative acts and the Latvian constitution, namely the establishment of a Russia Today office in Latvia goes against Latvia's regulations on the establishment of mass media and the provisions for online media. There is an issue of public rather than private interests of the news agency Russia Today. The national regulations suggest that foreign enterprises can register in Latvia if they are subject to private law. However, the documentation received from Russia Today suggests that the organization operates in a public rather than private sphere. And, it represents the public interest of public sector and representatives. And Just to finish, I would like to make it clear that Latvia is firmly committed to the freedom of speech, and censure is forbidden in my country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next delegation who wanted to take the floor in right of reply is the United States of America.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to exercise right of reply to our comments made by the Russian delegation. The situation, contrary to the comments of my colleague from the Russian Federation, is not an internal conflict. There is no question that Russia has violated Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, as well as illegally annexed Crimea, which virtually no country in the world has recognized. Contrary again to the statements of the Russian Federation representative that Crimea is an indivisible part of the Russian Federation. It is not. In the international community's view, it remains a part of Ukraine. And furthermore, there was no coup. Viktor Yanukovych fled. There is a huge difference between the two. There is the effort to manipulate history and use it to play to one country's advantage. We would recommend that members of the Russian delegation attend the side event that the United States and Sweden together are co-hosting that looks at efforts to rewrite history to support the political purposes of certain parties. And lastly, on the reference to the U.S. Department of Defense law of the War Manual, the Russian statement is inaccurate, as my distinguished colleague, the U.S. Ambassador to the OSCE, Daniel Baer, has made clear in the Permanent Council before. The purpose of the manual is to support full adherence to international law. The Department of Defense is engaging with journalists and civil society to make sure that we fully understand their concerns, and Ambassador Baer is in constant contact and committed to meet with the representative on freedom of media to get her views on this, and looks forward to that meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the U.S. delegation. I do not see any more delegation who wants to exercise the right to reply. As far as in the right to reply, one question was explicitly mentioned to ODIHR. I would just say that I'm ready, of course, to address that directly with the delegation of Azerbaijan, because, of course, certainly there cannot be any speech or any talk that we would have not been ready to extensive consultations after, of course, our needs assessment report, and it's well documented, even offering and wanting from my side to talk with your foreign minister about that. And we, of course, intensively then discussed on that the last time on August 31st, but I would like to get back to you also directly on that. Then, of course, we have, I'm sorry, just hearing that there is one more right to reply wants to be exercised by Ukraine. I hope I did not oversee you, but I just heard that it came now. Okay.
Я хотел специально обратиться.
Yes, I would like especially to speak in Russian to the Russian delegation to explain that Crimea is the territory of Ukraine. It's a part of Ukraine and not an integral part of the Russian Federation, as was said, and it is currently occupied by the Russian Federation. If you say that we need to provide the opportunity to the people to self-determine their status, then let's give the opportunity to the Crimean Tatars. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now again, no more delegations wanted to take the floor. That brings me, of course, here to the end of this opening session. More or less on time, but of course, before thanking also the translators who made this possible, I would give the floor now to the first Deputy Director of ODIHR for some technical and organizational remarks, Beatriz Balmin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am just to share with you a few points of technical information that are already included in your timetable and meeting manual. The list of speakers for each working session will be open 1 hour prior to the start of each session, but this time it will be limited to 50 speakers per session. So it means that the list may be closed before the start of the session once the limit is reached. So please make sure that you sign up on time if you want to take the floor in a particular session. To allow as many participants as possible to speak, speaking time will be limited to the time defined by the moderator, and the moderators will be strict in keeping it. Given this time limit, you are encouraged to first present your recommendations when you take the floor, and you are encouraged to distribute your interventions through the document distribution system. To facilitate good translation, please provide your notes or statements, if you have any, to the interpreters. Please give such notes to the documentation desk before the session. Those notes will not be distributed further unless you specifically ask for it. ODIHR will continue to compile all recommendations emerging from the meeting. In order to achieve this, you must submit your recommendations to the documentation center as a separate document, preferably in electronic form. Each session has a rapporteur that is assigned and that will produce a summary of the session. The reports from the first week will be available online in the second week, and the reports from the last week, apart from the 18th session, will be circulated before the closing plenary. All reports will be included in the final consolidated summary of the meeting. Live streaming, please note, we are live streaming all the sessions in 2015 HCIM website. This year, we also created a special HCIM 2015 highlight website, where you can find the updates from the meeting, and you can enter the page from the main 2015 HCIM website. You can also follow the HCIM 2015 on Twitter, and the hashtag is HCIM 2015. And this year, participants are also encouraged to join the OSCE United in Countering Violent Extremism campaign on social media and show or tell how they are united with the OSCE in countering violent extremism by tagging their posts with the hashtag UnitedCVE. There will be also opportunities, especially today and during working session 8, to take photos supporting the campaign. There are also a number of interesting side events scheduled in the course of the implementation meeting, indicated in the timetable and in some more detail in the overview of side events that you should have received by now. Delegates, as well as NGO and international organizations' rooms, are available and located in the first floor with a number of computers and other office equipment. Restaurant and cafe are available to participants during the whole meeting. Every day there will be a special menu at reduced prices, and you can benefit of 15% discount, informing that you participate in the conference. Please familiarize yourself immediately after this plenary with the emergency exit procedures to be followed in case of fire or other accidents. And for security emergency cases, please approach the designated ODIHR security officer. During the whole meeting, our staff will be available to answer your questions. The registration desk will also offer information on the meeting, including on cultural and social events. We would like to inform you that the newly opened Museum of the History of Polish Jews, Polin, offers free entrance for participants of the meeting. You will need to present your badges at the ticket office. The leaflets are available at the information desk, and the museum offers also a free guided tour for participants on Sunday, 27th of September, and you have to sign up at the registration and information desk and bring your badges. Finally, I'm pleased to announce that there will be several receptions taking place during the conference. Our host country, Poland, is offering a reception for all participants tonight at the Polish MFA Palace in Vauxhall, starting 7 p.m. The German chairmanship is hosting a reception on 29 here at the Sofitel, starting at 8 p.m. ODIHR will host a reception on 30th of September at Villa Vauxhall, starting at 8 p.m. And finally, the Serbian chairmanship is offering its reception on 1st of October, starting 8 p.m. in Opera Club. To enter all the receptions, you must bring your badges. Exact information, including the addresses, is available in the meetings manual, and the maps will be available at the registration desk. Participants with special needs, please contact us for transport. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Beatrice and the whole team who organized it. The session is closed.